everybody, grab your Bible and a pencil and a journal and maybe even a cup of coffee and join in on our conversation. But first, I would like for you to write this down. Isaiah 53, verses 5 and 6. But he was pierced through for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The chastening for our well-being fell upon him, and by his scourging we are healed. All of us are like sheep that have gone astray. Each of us have turned to his own way, but the Lord has caused the iniquity of us all to fall on him.
Hey everyone, welcome to Write This Down with Dot Bowen. My name is Cara. I am Dot's daughter, and every week we sit down together and we talk through truth and scripture. And in this episode about healing, we're really talking about the difference between wounds and scars. And I will say, if you are hurting or healing in whatever season or situation you may be in, I do think, and at least our hope, is that this conversation would, and all of the conversations we've had on healing, but that it would bring you hope that God is our healer and that he can heal all things and that there's always light that can come out of any brokenness or anything that's hurting. So we're really glad that you've joined in our conversation, and we would love for you to pull up a chair and join in our conversation.
Hey, Cara.
Hey, Mom. By his wounds, we are healed.
We are.
So what does that mean?
It says that by his wounds we're healed in the fact that Jesus died for us.
He did.
And that because of his desire and love for us, that he wanted to take upon himself all the things that we have to go through. Some of the things that we go through, that's why he went through temptation. That's why he came to earth. He wanted to show us he understood. He understands.
What's that verse that says, for we don't have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with us?
Yeah. That,
in our weakness,
it's in Hebrews.
Or something like that. Okay, yeah, Hebrews.
Yeah, because, a lot of times we're like, well, you're God, you don't understand. And I think when we're talking about pathway to healing, one of the things that are extremely soothing to us is when we, are with someone and they've gone through similar, not everybody's gone through the same things, but being able to feel like somebody understands. I don't think everybody understands exactly, because I think every one of us, and we certainly feel this way, even if our pain or suffering or some of the things that we've gone through, trauma, whatever, is very similar to someone else's, it's still not exactly the same.
Yeah, because of our experience well, it's like I mentioned this last week when we were talking about forgiveness, on how one of the things that was really comforting to me is that, not that he was betrayed. I hate that for Jesus, but that he understands that, because he has experienced that. He experienced betrayal or pain or, feeling forgotten or
rejected.
Rejected, and so much more. But those things that we so often feel as humans, he understands on a deeper level. And I know it says even in the Old Testament about how God is a compassionate and understanding God. So it's, right. I think that that's already in his nature, but it's, another level when Jesus as a human, in his humanness,
that's right.
Yeah, he understands it on a deeper level. But that definitely is always something that is comforting to me, because it's just like anything, if we're grieving, just to having someone to sit with us. Not that fixes everything, but it does. Yeah, you don't feel as alone. You don't
feel as alone. Yeah. And I think that, when we're talking about the wounds and the hurt and the pain, we all go through them. I was thinking about this before we started this conversation, that we don't want to sugarcoat anything. Pain is pain. Yeah. But there are a lot of things that I know people have gone through that I can't even comprehend. There are a lot of hurt. There's a lot of trauma. There's a lot of things that people have had to experience that they never thought that they would. I don't know what it's like to be persecuted, for my faith and sit there with a gun, or know that one of my loved ones have been, taken because, they were kidnapped or they were hostage or whatever. There are so many things that's going on in the world. Certainly, we believe that Christians have been persecuted for their faith then in New Testament and now. And so today, as we're talking about wounds and scars, I want to be sensitive to that person that has been extremely deeply hurt or have experienced some unimaginable trauma in their lives. And I don't think anybody can just tell them, just get over it, or how long it takes for someone to grieve or someone to, get through that healing process. I think that as we look at scripture and we know that God is a God, he is, he understands, like we're saying, he has bore, our sin. He has taken upon himself, the sorrow and the pain of the cross. I think that we just have to realize that everybody deals with the healing process differently. It's just like if you have a wound and you have, something happen to you, your body has somehow experienced some kind of wound and, opened up, whatever, and you go to the doctor and he'll sew it up or whatever, but he'll always say, well, basically, it should take 4 or 5 weeks for this.
Yeah.
But depending on how your skin is and how you heal, it might be sooner or later. So in the same way, sometimes the heart, being able to heal the heart, the damage of your heart and your soul and your emotions, those kind of things, nobody can really tell.
There's no timeline or no.
There's no time. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so if someone says, well, I've been hurt, it's been years ago, I feel stupid that, I'm still dealing with these wounds, then, I would just say, go to God, with this, but take time to heal, take time to allow God to heal your heart, because who knows how long it takes.
Yeah. And I would say, be gracious to yourself, like show yourself grace. Like, don't be so hard on yourself because of that. Because it's like, you don't, there's no rule or timeline.
No.
You're not doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and I mean, they say, and this is going to sound like I'm contradicting what you just said, and I'm not, but they say time heals. And I disagree with that.
Well, no, I think it takes time to heal.
I think it takes time to heal, but time isn't what heals. Like God may use time to heal you, but God is the one who heals in time. That's where it's like,
absolutely.
Time is not what is going to heal you. And I think that's why a lot of times we can beat ourselves up because we may have in our head of like, oh, I should be healed by this. And it's like, well, that's not, I don't think God would say that I don't think God's looking at us like, oh, why are you not healed by now? And so I don't think we should do that to ourselves. But I think that people saying things like that of, time heals all, or, whatever the phrase is, I think that can make us feel that way, because then it's like, oh, well, it has been a lot of time and I'm not healed. And it's like, well, that's okay. That's not, I don't think that's what God says, but God is the one who heals in time, and he can use time.
And time is time. That's what it is. Time is time.
Right. Time is not what heals.
And God is a healer. And God is a healer. I speaking of time is time, today I was reading Ecclesiastes in 3, and it says there's appointed time for everything. There is a time for every event under heaven, a time to give birth and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, and a time to tear down and a time to build up. And as you go in, it says a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. And, I think in time, there's many layers, there's many levels of healing. There's a time that you think, oh, I'm good, I'm okay. And then somebody kicks that wound or kicks that scar, and it might start bleeding a little bit. And the only way I think about with wounds and scars is that one thing, we all have them. And I think that that's, one of those things of, we all understand what it's like to be hurt. We all understand what it's like to feel wounded, I guess, or feel like wounds. And I do believe that God uses the wounds and the hurt and the pain to show us that he is the healer, to show us that we can get through these moments. We can live, past our hurt. We can live past those moments. I remember years ago, and actually you were the one that told me this, and I think you had gone to counseling. I think we might have talked about this before, where we were just talking about the wounds. Like when you are beginning to get into the healing process, often we think that's actually we're healed. Or, I think I'm okay with this right now. And then something will happen. You'll realize, wait a minute, I think I'm really dealing with some more either bitterness or anger or just feeling ashamed or regret or whatever. And that sometimes it's very disheartening because we think, I should be through this, more. But sometimes it's just that we've bumped up against that wound. We're reminded of the past. And I think
so. What did I teach you?
Well, what you were saying to me is don't tell people or don't start teaching or don't start dealing with the circumstances from the position of a wound. You deal with the circumstances, you deal with the pain from your scars. You start from the scars.
Yeah, I remember that now because it was when you were writing your first book. I think that's what it was. I don't know. You're writing something, and it was years ago. But yeah,
the race.
And there were some things that it was just a little too raw. It was like an open wound, and that was one thing I learned was to write from your scars. Like in other words, write from the places that have been healed. There may be a scar there because you've been wounded, but it's healed for the most part. Sometimes scars can reopen depending on how new the scar is and that sort of thing.
Or how many times it's been hit.
Yeah. So that was it, which I think is a great principle, whether you're writing or teaching or even just giving advice to a friend.
Or giving your testimony or
giving your yeah. I'm even thinking of a day-to-day example with one of my best friends. She was actually giving me advice, and I don't know that it was the best advice. And so I was kind of listening to her loosely. I don't know what the word is, but I was kind of taking it with a grain of salt because I knew that she was fresh. Her wounds were fresh. So she was coming from not a place of healing. And that wasn't a bad, there's nothing wrong with what she was saying in terms of, I'm not dissing her. I'm just saying we can speak differently when we're coming out of a wound versus when we're coming out of a healed place, whether you're giving advice or hearing advice or speaking or teaching or whatever you're doing.
I think that everyone in the room, or certainly the person you're talking to, knows that you're speaking from a wound and not a scar, but you're not aware of it. I think that the way that you say things, I think the attitude, I think the feeling that you get when somebody's talking, you're like, oh my gosh, she's still hurt over this, or she's angry. You can sense the emotion behind it. And I think that's when I say speak from a scar, because you're going to miss the point. The person, whoever you're sharing it with, is going to miss the point because they are going to pick up, you're still mad or you're still angry or you're still having to deal with it. Now, again, that doesn't mean you don't give your testimony or you don't tell someone what God has done in your life and how God has healed. There are layers of healing. There's layers of going back and going, okay, now, we worked through that part of that trauma or those kind of, situations where it may be layers of it, may be all kinds of layers of hurt. But you can tell, everybody knows except the person's talking that they're talking from their wound and not their scars. And what we mean by scars, I think we need to explain that. What we mean is we know we've been hurt and we've worked through it. And we're in the healing process.
Well, I think there has been healing to it to where maybe it still stings, but you can speak from a place of hope, because especially if you have walked through the healing process with the Lord, like all of our wounds, and I know we'll get into this where Jesus kept his scars for a reason, which we can go into that in a little bit, but God wants to use our wounds and our scars for his glory, to be able to relate to other people or to share what he's done in and through us through those hard things, because like you said, we've all been hurt in some way or another. No one escapes life without pain, unfortunately, but there's always hope from our wounds. Right. If you've walked through the healing process with the Lord, because he's hope. So I think it's it's that where it's sometimes, and that's even with my friend that one time, it wasn't that she was giving bad advice. It just, there honestly was really not a lot of hope in what she was saying, because she was still it was so
Right.
raw for her. Like she didn't know if there was hope yet. Like it was so
Right.
fresh for her. And so she hadn't really even begun the healing process to even fight for that hope or to kind of move into that hope. So anyway, I think that's part of it too, where it's not that God can't use it, but I think it's for us, it's where we are a lot of times if we're so fresh in it, it's like we're just trying to keep our own head above water.
Right. And I think that's where you can kind of say, well, is this a wound or is this a scar? Well, I do believe that the wound pays a lot of attention to the hurt. I think a scar pays a lot of attention to the healing process and what God
And
has
the
done.
healer. Yeah.
And the healer. And so I think, if you're like, well, I don't know, am I talking from a wound or am I talking from a scar? And I think you pay attention to how you feel too. Like if you are still angry and mad about what happened versus you are hopeful that, well, yes, that really did, hurt. And yes, I don't even know how God, rescued me out of this, darkness, but he did. And then there's always the but and yet, there's always that, but God, or yet God just did, amazing things. And I think that's one of the things that, we will know whether or not am I in the process of healing to the point that I've got scars, or am I to the process, I'm still in the healing process. You can still have a scar, I think, and still be healing. I think it is a layer of whether or not I begin to see the healer, or, as a lot of people, talk about, not all things are good, but all things work together for good. I think when you can begin to see how God has used this, some of the good things that have happened and out of this, because there's always something good, even if it's just he's gone, or even if it's over with, or even if it's just I'm in the healing process. There's something good in it, and we have to look at that. And if we don't see anything but trauma and horribleness, you're in the healing process.
I was going to say, when you're saying that, it's not that there's not a place where it's like, oh, I've arrived, so now I can, whatever, speak to.
Right.
But a lot of times I think seeing how God can use your pain to help other people can be that's a part of the healing process as well. Because that, like you're saying, like that, it's like, oh, like God is using this. God can use this.
And God wants to use
to bring, to help show that, like what God can do in a situation, how God has brought you through, how God has, brought you to the other side, or bringing you to the other side.
And I think it's okay if you're sharing with somebody and they say something and you're in the healing process, you can say, I'm in the healing process, but I am beginning to see that, God is, doing things in my heart, or he's helping me to understand the importance of obedience and forgiving him or forgiving them or whatever. I think you can be in the healing process and definitely share your testimony.
Yeah.
But I think the most powerful testimony is the testimony of how God has brought you through. But it's just as powerful, in my opinion, of God's bringing me through. Like, I think you can relate to say, you look in your past and go, well, I did deal with this. Now I deal with this. It's a process of constantly living life in a world that is we're surrounded by pain and suffering.
Yeah.
You're not going to escape this life without some kind of effect of pain and suffering. You're just not.
Yeah. It's like your perspective. So there are a lot of things that's depending on, well, maybe everything that we are healing from, we may not want to remember it. Like I'm sure, thinking of like Jesus, like I'm sure thinking about the cross is in and of itself probably would not be his favorite memory. Like that was not the highlight of his life. But if he looked at it which I'm sure he does this, but looking at it through the lens of it brought him closer to his people. That's what he has now, can have a relationship with us in a deeper way. So I think we too, looking at what we've been through and our scars through that lens, as well as maybe you don't want the scar because it's like that reminds me of, a traumatic or terrible past or terrible event or, whatever, which is understandable.
Yeah.
And I think asking God to redeem your memory of it I'll share a quick example. Last week when I was mentioning about forgiveness and going through the traumatic and terrible experience I went through not quite 10 years ago, when I really wrestled with forgiveness, I remember feeling like I didn't, because there was so much evil spoken over me as well. And I didn't want to remember. There were so many elements of what happened that I just did not want to remember. And I don't want to remember. But I also knew that God had rescued me in a really powerful way. And I remember praying, God, I take my memories. I don't want to remember this, but help me to remember enough so that I never forget what you've rescued me from and what you've done in my life through this situation. And I will say that he has 100% answered that. There are things that if you ask me about that season, specifics, as if it never happened, because I'd be like, I have no idea. I could not tell you. If I sat and thought about it long enough, maybe, but I don't want to, I don't want to.
Yeah.
But it's literally, the memories truly are gone, but I do remember enough to know that he has rescued me. I'm he has rescued me and he has done a miracle. So,
yeah. And you have to remember a little bit. You have to remember.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. That's
healing.
The whole point. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the whole point where it's help me to remember enough. And I think that is a prayer that God, he answered it for me. He doesn't want us to remember just to I want you to remember all these terrible things.
For you to stay in pain, yeah.
Yeah, and I didn't have certain things that, I kind of, in that prayer, I didn't know what I needed to remember to. It wasn't let me remember this and not that or whatever. Right. It just was the general of just letting the Lord take that and be hey, please take these memories. But also what memory would need to stay that one wouldn't cause, the things that I do remember that remind me of what he rescued me from, they're not things that it doesn't put me in a dark hole. You know what I mean? It doesn't, right. It just reminds me of oh my gosh, thank you for, it's the hope. It's this is what God has done. And I can use those, well, not me, but God uses those things to help other people or to recognize, whatever God may want to do with it.
We've said this over and over again, how much we really, really enjoy running from pain. And, if it's any kind of conflict, pain, if I can find a door out, I'm going. But unfortunately, for whatever reason, we tend to learn more through our pain than we do than our good times. I think it's C.S. Lewis has a quote here as, God whispers to us in our pleasure, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pain. And I think that that's a lot of what, unfortunately, what we experience, life experiences, is that it is the pain where God is the most real and the most present. I don't think God wants us to go through pain just to experience him, because that's not how he created the world and us at the very beginning. But because we are sheep that want to go astray, we definitely have this tendency to, when things are really going well, wander off from God. And because God does know this, that the greatest source of life, living a life that's worth living, is when we are in peace and contentment and aware of his presence and whatever it is, then that's what he wants. That's the goal, is that he wants to have that, intimate relationship with us. And he wants us to know him and that he loves us, and that, we're not in this horrible world all alone, that we have, we have him, and hopefully we have other people that we can call on that will help us walk through the healing process. But the goal is to heal so that we will be able to keep our focus, on him and not necessarily the wound.
So we all have scars.
Yeah, we do.
Wounds and scars. And kind of going back to what we were saying at the beginning, where we have a God who can empathize. He's been
there.
He's been there. Why do you think Jesus kept his scars? Because he's God. He's talk about healed. I mean, he says healed as it comes. He's
Yeah,
God.
he
So
is.
Jesus, he died, but he's good. He's fine. He didn't have to keep his scars. So why do you think that he kept his scars?
I personally think that he kept his scar so that in heaven, even though we're not going to be crying over our sin, or, we're not weeping, we're not, dealing with sin, and we're not doing that. I think it's just always a reminder of how much we are loved by him. I think that when he kept what he did, I think when he was resurrected, came up out of the grave, I think it was very important for him to keep his scars so that he can show it to Thomas, who was doubting, walked around. He made it very known that, yes, I did die, and yes, I did come back. But the only evidence of that he's truly, resurrected, he's truly out of the grave, this is really Jesus, not somebody that's pretending to be that, was because he had the scars. And I think not only did he want the disciples and everybody there at that moment before he went to heaven and sat down at the right hand of God, I think he wanted to say, hey, I am God. I am that. And I think that's what Isaiah is saying. We have someone that he did bear our sorrows. He did that. We've got to know that Jesus, if we're going to give our life to Jesus and we're going to surrender him and we're going to ask him to come into our pain and wrestle with us through this healing process, we got to know that he's somebody bigger and stronger and more powerful than we are. And I think the scars is a reminder that, yes, I'm the one that was on the cross. I am the one there. And I think that when, we see and read that he kept the scars, we are reminded as well, yes, that it was Jesus and that he conquered death and he's powerful and he loves us. And I think that was why, with Thomas, it was so important for Thomas to see his scarred hand. So to me, Jesus kept the scars, not because he didn't remember what he did, but that before he went to heaven, how important it is for everyone to know, I am that same Jesus that was on the cross. I am that Jesus that was put in the tomb. I am that Jesus, who died for you, and I'm God.
I think too, it's like a good reminder. I was just thinking when you're talking, like how easy it is for us to, kind of similar to what I was just saying, but like we may not want our scar. Like we may see it as like a branding of like, oh, this is something terrible that has happened to me. And almost like it's our identity when it's not, because our identity is we're a child of God.
Yep. Not what happens to us.
Not what happens to us or what, has been done or whatnot.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good, like looking at Jesus and like, you don't look at him, like his scars don't take away from the fact that he's God. The scars don't.
It actually represents that he is.
Yeah. And so I think, again, it's like we're in good company. Like we may have our scars, we're not God. But even more so, like if that didn't change who Jesus is. Like his scars don't change who he is. It magnifies,
he's still God.
Like you're saying, like it shows even more so that he's God. And I think for us, it doesn't show that we're God, but it shows who God is. Like look what God has done. So anyway, I was just thinking that when you're saying of like how much hope, it's like a beautiful picture instead of a broken picture.
And remember, we got to know that we're not left here by ourselves, just one another. Like I love talking to you. I love talking to people.
I like talking to you too.
You've been, having these conversations. And I love, sharing my story. I love, how God has used a lot of the things that he's used your story, your pain. He's used my pain. But if you and I are the only thing that's like, if our story is the only thing that brings hope and not Jesus, we're in a lot of trouble. And I think that for us, how important it is when God says, I'll never leave you or forsake you. What he's saying is this: I know where you've been. I was on the cross. I need you to know I am God. I'm not in the grave. I'm not on the cross. I am God, and I'm sitting at the right hand of the Father, and I'm rooting for you. I'm interceding for you, and you have someone on your side that wants to heal your pain that can. I can listen to your story. I can sympathize with your story. I can sometimes empathize with your story, but I cannot change you. I cannot change how that story can, free you. I can't
You
change
can't
your
redeem
heart.
it. Yeah, like you can't redeem it.
And so I think that for us, as we're saying, well, Jesus was on the cross. Yes, that's true. There were two other people on the cross, but only Jesus came out of the grave. And so that's why the scars were so important, is that I'm alive. So the other two that was on the cross, they're still dead.
And it's like our scars really show victory. And not that
Yes,
like we're awesome, but it shows the victory of the cross. It shows the victory of like what God has done and what God is continuing to do in and through us.
Carrie, you say this all the time, like brings life from death. So his scar is there's life after death. His scar is like, I conquered death. I defeated death. I destroyed evil. I'm God. And I think the scars was his physical evidence that he was who he said he is. And it is very important for us to know that God is who he says he is. And if God is who he says he is, then only God can heal our wounds, and only God can use those scars as a testimony of God's faithfulness and hope, as you say. But I just think that, as we're ending this conversation and talking a lot about wounds and healing and, the pathway to wanting to be healed, I just am reminded who else is in this conversation with us. And I don't know what the scars, I know your heart as well. You would never want to just flippantly go, well, just forgive and, go get some healing. It's not that at all. And we started out with the very first thing of recognize your pain and don't hide from that, but find hope in it. Find hope that the same God that loves you and died for you is the same God that's going to take those, what you consider probably the most painful circumstances in your life, and bring hope in it. Yeah. Because he's God. And so, today I think as we wrap up our little conversation about Pathway of Healing, wouldn't you, Cara, want to encourage the other people that are listening to our conversation to say, hey, sit before God, talk to God about your pain and things that you're going through, and ask him to touch your heart and your mind and your soul and begin the healing process.
Yeah. And I think let God heal it. I mean, like I said last week, it's not the worst hurt I've ever been through. I will say that. But I have been hurt. I mean, like you said, hurt is hurt. Tears have been shed. There have been, there's been loss of sleep. There's been, there's hurt. But it's seeking the Lord. It's going to him and saying, like, here's what happened. And not even that, but here's where my heart's at. Like, here's where I'm honestly at and forgiving, but letting his nail pierced hands, like his scarred hands, heal your heart. Yeah. And I don't know how he does it, but I mean, you and I know, like from the deepest of hurts to the, maybe the more quote unquote lighter hurts. It's just letting him heal your heart.
I say this all the time. There's worse things than being hurt.
I know. I hate it when you say that.
I know. But it's
I know it's true. I know. Yeah.
It is. Because you know what? I think what's worse than being hurt is not being able to go to the only one that can wrap his loving arms around you, take those scars, those scarred hands, draw you close to his heart and say to you, honey, I understand. I know. But this too shall pass, because one day there'll be no more sorrow. There'll no be hurt. There's no more pain. There's no more suffering. There's no more death. But until then, I'm here with you in that pain. And to me, I'd rather hurt knowing that God's with me than to, in reality, to never hurt and miss him altogether.
I would rather hurt with him. And I think you can only say that. At least I'll say for myself, I can only say that because I know the power of his healing touch. I mean, I've experienced it. I wouldn't be sitting here today if I hadn't. Thanks for listening. I'm so glad that you could be a part of our conversation. To continue the conversation, you can find Dot on social media at .bowen or visit her website, .bowen.com. Subscribe, like, and share with your friends, and we will see you next week on Write This Down with Bowen.